All right, now we are privileged to host the ambassador of Israel to Kenya, Michael Lotem. He's in the studio. Good morning, Balozi.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. That's the hot seat of the Situation Room. How does it feel?
The situation in Israel is very hot.
Yes.
It is. It is indeed quite hot. To welcome you to the conversation, CT has the day's proverb. This week's proverbs are coming from the United Republic of Tanzania.
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the United Republic of Tanzania. Unknown information is like a dark night.
Unknown information is like a dark night.
Yes.
Balozi, when you hear this proverb, what do you make of it? What's your interpretation of it?
Unknown information is like a dark night.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes we think we know, but what we see is not reality. And this is what unfortunately happened to us in the last, I guess, few weeks. If you would have followed the Israeli media, everybody was busy with explaining the unrest in Gaza on the background of lack of money from Qatar. But actually they were preparing the attack that took place yesterday morning.
What exactly happened on Saturday morning?
What happened is that approximately, we estimate about 1,000 Hamas terrorists infiltrated Israel in around 8 to 10 different spots on the fence, the main crossing point, attacked 22 rural settlements and towns, and started the carnage. So far, we know of more than 700 civilian murdered. I'm talking about kids that were shot in bed, elderly people that were going to pray, because yesterday was the day before yesterday was the last day of Sukkot, a holy holiday to Israel tabernacle.
Yes.
And that reminds us, of course, 50 years back, Yom Kippur War. Again, on the most religious day, most holy day, we were attacked. Many in the south carry guns on a day-to-day. They don't carry guns when they go to synagogue. And the Hamas took advantage of this. So we have, as I said, more than 2,000 injured. There is still fighting going on in 3 locations in the south, inside Israel. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, launched the attack in Gaza, but that's of course only the beginning. There were also some rockets shot yesterday from Lebanon, and Hezbollah took responsibility. And even in Egypt, a policeman opened fire on a bus with Israeli tourists, killing the Egyptian guide and 2 Israelis.
So several villages and towns were attacked on Saturday. How close were they to the fence that separates these 2 regions?
Some are very close to the fence, some about 10 to 20 kilometers from the fence, and some of the towns even further away from that. But as I said, it was early morning of a holy day. People were still either in bed or going on the way to the synagogue. And we have a few dozens, probably more than 100 people that were taken hostages in Gaza. And again, I'm talking about, you will see, I'm sure that your producer will bring up the pictures soon. You will see children, you see whole families. You will see a family inside Israel where the Hamas shot the elder daughter, and you will see the son who is 7 and his sister 9. What you will not get is what the Hamas terrorist tells them in Arabic. He tells them in Arabic, we murdered your sister, we are going to violate her body now. This is what they are saying to a 7 and 9 years old, and the parents are there.
You said
We're talking about, otherwise we say beast, but I will not use this word in Kenya. Beast, you have very nice animals in the game reserves. These are non-humans. I think that the only time we saw in the last period such images was from Syria, ISIS. People decapitated, and ISIS people being proud of it. So this is what we are dealing with. And I saw only a couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken, here in Lamu, a very strong movie.
Yeah, such attacks. You say in the build-up to this, there had been something that was happening inside Gaza. It was even being covered by Israeli media. What was happening inside Gaza?
In the last few weeks, there was a lot of commotion, a lot of demonstrations around the fence and inside. And again, the interpretation was that Qatar, which on a regular basis supplies Gaza with money, did not send them the agreed sums of money. So we were interpreting it as an internal dispute. But that was to camouflage their approach to the fence, and they laid explosives next to the fence while attracting our attention, which happened the same yesterday. At 6:30, day before yesterday, started with 5,000 rockets and missiles shot at Israel. But that was just to camouflage the ground attack. So many thought that it's another big round that happened so often in the past. But actually, it was to camouflage the ground attack.
But Ozzy, what do you think triggered this last, attack that we're seeing? There's a lot of speculation that's rife at the moment. And just like you've alluded to now, the thought could have been that it was just, another activity in the series of activities that's taken place over the years. But this is pretty gruesome. This is pretty serious. This is, not that anything that happened previously was not, but from both sides, it has come out that this one had some significance. What could have triggered what we see happening yesterday and then into today?
One thing that I learned is not to try and understand the logic of murderers. And I'm glad I can't understand their logic. Some people, this is what they do in life. Al-Qaeda, they finished in Afghanistan, some of them came to East Africa. People move from one place to another. And killing is the aim. There's no logic behind it. There's no, not political reasoning. And I think our mistake, we are very logical and reasonable people. We try to explain all these things logically. So, many in Israel explain things, they are in a dear economic situation. In the last few weeks, we eased all restrictions on Gaza. We supply them with electricity, with cement, more permits to come and work in Israel. A big part of those coming to work in Israel supplied the intelligence, the information that enabled these people to get straight to the towns and the military bases. So I think that one thing we should do is try to understand that some people, what they do is killing without any political or ideological, I guess, but nothing beyond it.
And yet, there is an inherent problem still that hasn't ever seemed to have gone away. Could you give some insight into what historically has been the problem? Because what we are seeing today is not a 2023 problem. What we're seeing today continues to be manifestation of a historic issue. So could you give some light into that for understanding across board?
I'm very glad that you are asking this question. I'll tell you why. Because I hear many commentators also on the big international networks who do the mistake. They put Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in one boat. That's a big mistake, a very big mistake. The Palestinian Authority considered Hamas as a threat. The Palestinian Authority security forces with ours cooperate against the Hamas. So there is an issue between us and the Palestinian Authority. Of course, these are not news to anybody. But maybe it's news to many that we left Gaza in 2005. Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister, left Gaza. We're not in Gaza. Hamas was elected in democratic elections in Gaza. So they rule their own place. Confusing it and bringing it into the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a mistake. We can sit now and talk about the Palestinian Authority and Israel, no problem. But let's keep Hamas out of it. And I'm sure that soon enough the Palestinian ambassador here will have something to say. You should ask him if he dares going into Gaza. Maybe inside, yes, out, I'm not sure he will come out of there. So let's make no mistakes. The Palestinian Authority officials don't go to Gaza. These are two separate issues.
But then, like you've said, the Hamas was democratically elected by the people of Gaza to hold positions, elective office. So they are legitimately in leadership in Gaza.
Yeah, but you don't want really me to give you examples of
Should it really matter whether Israel recognizes them or not if the people have elected them, as you said, democratically?
Yeah, but let's not get into historical examples of regimes which were elected democratically. That's not the test of democracy, one-time elections. Do they have a democracy now? Can they be re-elected now? What about the human rights in Gaza? Let's talk about democracy if democracy is the issue. So the fact that a regime was elected democratically means nothing but that they were elected democratically at one point in time. And we should not go back to the 30s in Europe, of course.
If one looks at the history of Israel, and one looks at the conflicts or the wars that have been fought there, prior to this attack there had been 8, now we're talking about 9 major ones. And there's always a back and forth, and in between the back and forths, perhaps there's peace agreements that have been arrived at are sometimes lost in the conversation. Israel-Palestine, neighbors, historically one could even say they're relatives. Everyone who's been a prime minister or anyone who has held a position of authority, whether it's the UN or people in the US, have tried to broker lasting peace. Is this really a possibility? Is it a reality that can be realized?
Definitely yes. Again, let's look around, let's look into history. You can think about so many cases where countries were fighting severely for tens of years or hundreds of years. Look at Europe. I'm not talking about Russia, Ukraine these days, but Europe, Western Europe. So that's a lesson that things can change. Look at Israel and the Gulf states, and most of the Arab world and Israel today. There were so many talks about Israel and Saudi Arabia. By the way, I do believe that a part of the motivation of Iran, as I said, Hamas are murderers, they don't need any motivation. But obviously, it was also recognized by Hamas and Hezbollah that Iran was directed them. Iran is trying to block any approachment between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which was very much in the news in the last few weeks, which was an interest of Israel, Saudi Arabia, the US. And you can recall the late 90s when our approach or our relations with the Palestinian Authority got better and better. So it was, again, the extreme factions in the Palestinian Authority that blocked it and brought the Intifada, the uprising in the late 90s.
The first or the second?
Both the second,
Yes.
the second Intifada. That was after Camp David, after the offer of Barak, and then Olmert gave them a 95% deal. You know, in the Middle East, we like to negotiate. If you get the 50% of what you want, you say thank you and you go home. If you get 70%, you do a party. If someone offers you 95%, you know, and they didn't take it. So, I mean, I believe that peace is possible. I come myself from a mixed city in Israel, from Haifa. You know, 20% of Israelis are Arab Israelis. Half of my neighbors were Arabs. So I grew with them.
Haifa is a beautiful city.
Yeah. So, look at Lebanon. Can you think about another country in the Middle East that can be the best friends of Israel, both traders, good life, but Lebanon was overtaken by Hezbollah.
You know, where I'm going with my question is this, huh? You mentioned the interest that Qatar has in Palestine, and especially in Hamas. We've had problems in the Horn of Africa, and there's always been mention of countries in the Middle East, the Arab countries, having an interest in the Horn of Africa. Now, they have resources, far more than some of these areas. Now, if indeed, as you say, there are parties within Palestine who would like to work with the state of Israel, would like to work towards peace, I dare say there may even be factions within Hamas who do not mind working towards peace. Now, in the absence of this external support, would they be able to do what they did yesterday?
No, there's no doubt that there was an external support to the operation of the Hamas. It's the intelligence, the planning, the operations. It's more than, you know, Hamas are a few thousand terrorists. You need a state behind to plan it and to assist you to execute it. And this morning they said it themselves, you know, Hezbollah and Hamas stated it, the Iranian link.
Do you have an ongoing disagreement with the country of Qatar and Iran? Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but the friend of my enemy is my enemy.
With Iran, it goes much beyond the disagreement, you know. When a country does everything from statements to operations, aiming at eliminating Israel, this is not
It's a policy.
It's not a propaganda by an Israeli diplomat. This is a quote from Iranians' leaders. This is what they teach, this is what they preach, and this is what they are after by developing the nuclear capabilities, the long-range missile capabilities, and supporting every terrorist organization around Israel. Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, different groups, small groups, unfortunately enough, in the West Bank. So there's a big hand, and of course, worldwide. I served in one of my previous postings was ambassador in Azerbaijan. You should Google and see how Iran is involved against Israeli targets in Azerbaijan. My own experience.
Pelosi, there are those who say that, you know, in this conflict between Israel and Palestine, they look at it from the angle of what Israel has been doing in terms of expanding its built-up areas and what they call occupation of land that belongs to Palestinians. And that the Palestinians who are pushing back are actually pushing back because they are saying, we want you out of our lands. What do you say to that?
Come and talk. Come and sit and talk. And you know, in Israel,
the counter-argument has been that as you talk about coming and sitting and talking, as the talks are being brokered elsewhere, Israeli administration is still pursuing further and further building of areas that are hitherto unoccupied by Israelis in Palestinian land. So on one hand, you're saying come and talk, but on the other hand, you're establishing new settlements.
Almost correct. I'll tell you why almost.
Why?
Because look again at the mid-90s, after the Oslo Agreement. We handed to the Palestinians majority of the land. Majority of the population was under Palestinian Authority rule. Okay, we left them. No, even today, there are 3 areas categorized in the West Bank. One were around, the smaller one around Israeli settlements, the bigger one around Palestinian Authority. When I drive, I can't go in. There's an Israeli soldier who blocks me. I can't go in. And there's the mixed. Mixed is where we take care of security, they take care of civilian, which again, I will not go there. An Israeli will not go there. So we stopped so many things. We withdrew. We gave them, we were negotiating in the mid-90s, in 2000 in Camp David. We offered, as I said, 95%. We offered them Shimon Peres, with the belief that joint industrial, look at the pictures, joint industrial areas will bring the peace.
Yeah.
And even on Saturday, the crossing of the vehicles with Hamas, they cross through the Erez crossing border. The Erez crossing border is a crossing that we open to enable workers, daily workers from Gaza to come to Israel. The easiest would be, to close them. They have their own place, their own rule.
Has Israel, since the 90s, has Israel been establishing new settlements in these areas? And in effect, pushing away some Palestinians. Yeah.
We have, most of them were expanded naturally. If a family has kids, the kids go to school, so that's the natural growth. The same has happened on the Palestinian side, of course. But again, let's not mix the two. The easiest would be to divert the discussion to the Israeli-Palestinian West Bank issue. That's not the issue today. The issue today is Hamas terrorists coming and slaughtering civilians in southern Israel, coming out from a self-rule area. And what does it have to teach me as a plain, Israeli? If you give a territory and you give them their self-rule, you take a risk. Better be there, control, and then you know what's going on and you control. What's the lesson? And
so it's giving justification for Israel to come back in and take full control.
No, I don't think that we will aim at this. The aim these days and in the coming days will be to eliminate all military capabilities of the Hamas.
So the UN Security Council held a closed-door meeting earlier, and the reports come out that they had a conversation on what to do with Israel, and there was no clear statement that was being made out of this. It says that they had a conversation, but they were going to meet again because there was a call for an open statement from America, and then some members were not for a direct statement on this, which included Russia and other permanent members of the UN Security Council. While this conversation continues to unfold, Ambassador, there have also been statements from various parts of the world in support and in condemnation, in support of Israel, in condemnation of the attacks, in others in calling for restraint and calm. Our own President William Ruto sent a statement, said Kenya joins the rest of the world in solidarity with the state of Israel and unequivocally condemns terrorism and attacks on innocent civilians in the country. The people of Kenya and their government hereby express deepest sympathy and send condolences to the families of all the victims, and also wishing a speedy recovery to the injured. They also say there is no justification whatsoever for terrorism, which constitutes a serious threat to international peace and security. The statement from the Foreign Affairs Ministry had said we're calling for maximum restraint from both sides on what has happened. The other statements have come from other parts of the world. Basically, there are those that are saying that, yes, whereas Israel has reserved the right for self-defense, they call on Israel to restrain from an all-out attack, but they recognize the right to self-defense. There are those then that say that by people like America, countries like America saying we recognize Israel has a right to self-defense, and Israel themselves saying we have a right to self-defense, there's some sort of justification for then going out on all-out war on even civilians in Gaza. What do you say to this?
Hitting civilians was never and will never be an aim of the Israeli Defense Forces. Not very often we like to go and check what international law says. But international law and the law of war is very clear about warriors distinguishing themselves from civilian population, by carrying arms and not hiding in between. It's so that the reality that the headquarters of the Hamas are built under the hospitals, in mosques, in private houses from which they launch the rockets. This is why we called civilian population in Gaza to clear the places where they know that the Hamas terrorists are hiding. And again, there will be casualties, not because Israel aims at civilians, but because the Hamas chose to hide behind civilians. There is a picture I saw just yesterday that was sent from the last engagement, from the last operation against the terrorists in Gaza, where a Hamas guy was trying to shoot back at Israeli forces, but he was in an open area. So what he took, you see him holding a small child in his arms and trying to move. Basically hiding behind the child. Using the children as hostages and collateral. As shields. Do you believe that there are many people in Gaza who do not support Hamas? I believe so, yeah. But we've witnessed even less cruel and regimes in the world, in different countries, where it's very difficult for the population to take arms and fight, especially when the regime holds the arms. So what they chose in 2005, I'm sure it's not their choice these days. This is why we enabled more and more Palestinians from Gaza to come to work in Israel. Not any other country, Other Arab countries don't invite the people from Gaza to come and work in their place, right? Why? Why is it? Every dollar that they earn is meaningful. Why don't we see any other Arab country inviting them? The answer is clear.
Balozi, through this conversation, you've said many times that this is not an issue of the Israeli-Palestinian tensions. And you say that this particular incidents over the last 24 to 48 hours is purely murder. That's what you've spoken about. An attack on Israel has been murder. I want to draw your attention to the communique that came from the African Union. I have my reservations about conclusive statements from the African Union. However, this is important here because it came from the chairperson, Musa Faki Mahmoud, and this is what he said in part of that. The chairperson the chairperson wishes to recall that denial of the fundamental rights of the Palestinian people, particularly that of an independent and sovereign state, is the main cause of the permanent Israeli-Palestinian tension. And we've seen a lot of commentary around this, that it seems that that particular tension cannot be put aside as a precursor to many of the things that we saw historically and a precursor to the attacks that we saw yesterday. Can we really remove that tension from the things that we are currently seeing taking place today?
Unfortunately, this statement is completely detached from reality. If the African Union calls the murder of more than 700 civilians as tension, there's no better indication that they are completely detached from reality. And again, you cannot speak at the same time about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and process and whatever, and about the Israeli Hamas. Israel has left Gaza, and in 2005 they rule their own place. They run their own institutions. They feed their own people. They arm their own people. So I'm not trying to avoid the other topic, but this is not the topic today. And by moving there, we play into the hands of the Hamas.
Can we really say, however, that the attacks that we saw are void of any kind of relation, though, to what we have seen happening before? Because we want to treat it as an isolated incident from what you're saying, but it cannot be. It must be attached to something. And I think in order to understand that, and I think this is a thing, what are we looking at here that would be causal to what we are saying? Because in a search for peace, which you speak of, that is very possible, you must look at what causes the conflict to then be able to reach a position of peace.
I'm not saying it's an incident. First, we are at war, so it's very far from being an incident. When 700 civilians are murdered, I will not call it an incident to begin with. Second, there is a common thing there between what the Hamas and the most extreme factions, very few, very, very, very few numbers of people in the West Bank aiming at the complete annihilation of Israel. So that's the context. And you don't negotiate with someone that comes and tell you, well, what I really want is you out of the place.
No. What I want you is to be removed from the planet. I want you dead and gone.
Yeah.
Yes. See, moving is different, meaning I want you to move from this geographical location to the other. But one, I want to extinguish you. I want to make sure you don't exist. It's a very different conversation.
Yeah, and this is what I'm doing now. And this is what I started doing on Saturday. So, again, this is the general picture. If you want to come and talk in a separate day on the Palestinian-Israeli, I'll come and gladly speak. I can sit with the Palestinian ambassador and we discussed that issue. But that's not the issue now.
The statement that was released by the spokesperson of Hamas soon after the attacks was looking at those contextual issues and saying there have been increased attacks and repression on the Palestinian people who live within Gaza. There's been desecration, what you call desecration, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and denial of people's rights to go and worship at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. What do you say to that?
By quoting what they say doesn't make it right?
Are you saying that none of what he's saying is true?
There were hundreds of pilgrims from East Africa, many from Kenya, in the last few weeks in Israel. Ask them about the freedom of praying and getting to the holy sites, the Holy Sepulchre, Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, or the Western Wall. Ask them. If I, as an Israeli, if I want to go up on Temple Mount to Al-Aqsa, I can't. I have specific hours and I have very strict limitations on what I can and I cannot do. If I'm a religious Israeli and an Israeli policeman will see me like doing something which will resemble praying, I will be immediately taken out. And that's the place that, historically it's not a belief where where both temples stood.
Yeah.
So about freedom of religion, let's not talk about what the Palestinians or the Palestinian Authority and let alone the Hamas, what they stand for. So we practice it. You can go anywhere. If a Kenyan Muslim would want to go, and I'm telling you because I had a few friends, I took them to Temple Mount, to Al-Aqsa, and of course I stayed out because the policemen wouldn't let me in. But then they were asked to state a few verbs from the Quran. And a good friend of mine, he's from Pakistan. He told him, look, my father is a Muslim, but look, my father was in the British Army, I can't quote. He was not allowed in.
Because he was considered not a Muslim.
Yeah.
You also talked about, some recent rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There have been talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, of course, America involved, in thawing relations between the two states. Now, the statement from the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Saudi Arabia following the attacks was, and let me just quote it. It says, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is closely following the developments of the unprecedented situation between a number of Palestinian factions and the Israeli occupation forces, which has resulted in a high level of violence on several fronts there. The Kingdom calls for an immediate halt to the escalation between the two sides, the protection of civilians and restraint. The Kingdom recalls in its repeated warnings of the dangers of the explosion of the situation as a result of the continued occupation, the deprivation of the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, and the repetition of systematic provocation against its sanctities. The Kingdom renews the call for the international community to assume its responsibilities and activate a credible peace process that leads to the two-state solution to achieve security and peace in the region and to protect civilians.
Luckily, what matters is not what an official statement says. Luckily, what matters is what is being negotiated and discussed behind closed doors. You would agree with me, I bet.
But when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is saying this publicly, they're saying, we still cannot forget or ignore what we consider as the deprivation of Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, the repetition of systematic provocation against sanctities.
Maybe you should quote what the UAE had to say about it.
I will look for the UAE statement next.
Yeah,
so what do you say about this one by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Because you called the one by the African Union unfortunate and uninformed. What do you say about this one by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
Look, we still don't have a diplomatic relation with Saudi Arabia. Let's be realistic. We are in a process, according to different sources. So at the moment, we don't have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. And for many years, they were considering themselves and they were leading the Palestinian issue. The major blow to the Palestinian extreme factions and to the Hamas is the possibility and the probability, which looked in the last few weeks very feasible, that Saudi Arabia will establish relations with Israel. And I can assure that once this would have happened, such a statement would have looked differently.
Do you think that this would affect that journey towards having
because
relations?
Even according to international media, right? The Saudis were talking with this so-called occupation forces, right?
Yeah.
So let's treat it with a grain of salt. All these public statements by a country, which is on one end, according to different sources, negotiating with us, and at the same time is not yet has established diplomatic relations with Israel.
Your Excellency, if there are extreme factions in Palestine, Lebanon, Saudi, Egypt, Syria, are there extreme factions in Israel?
There are also extreme factions, but let's determine what extreme means. Okay, extreme, you can have extreme ideas about non-eating food, meat, right? But you don't kill for it. So you can have extreme opinions about, or you have your own opinions about whether you should settle in a place or not, but you don't kill for it. That's the big difference between Israeli who holds opinions and others who hold some firm opinions. It's not what you believe in, what you do with this belief.
Okay. So the government that is currently in place, the government that the Prime Minister Netanyahu superintends, would you call them a middle ground? Would you call them right of left, left of right? How would you characterize it if we were to generally characterize this government?
I don't have to characterize them. They do it themselves. They characterize themselves as some part of the government as right-wing parties. So I don't have to give them any...
They've already given themselves those positions.
This is what they were running for. That was the election ticket. That was a platform, and this is what they say.
You see, where I'm going with this is, if they are right or left or center, then there are certain policies they'll pursue. And the policies that pursue, in many ways, influences the peace and stability of that particular region. This is really where I'm going with my questions.
You know what will be my very easy answer? Very easy.
Yes.
I will refer you to see a very interesting movie, documentary, about the 7 heads of the Shabak, the Internal Security Forces. It's a very good one, because you would expect the 7 former heads of the Shabak to be, tough guys, right? And listen what they have to say about peace with the Palestinians. Menachem Begin, who was leading a right-wing party, the Likud, he signed the peace agreement with Egypt, right?
He did.
Yeah.
Yitzhak Rabin, who was the chief of staff in 1967 war, right?
Yes.
He was leading the Oslo agreement. Ariel Sharon, the frightful Ariel Sharon, he left Gaza in 2005. So that's the big difference between a right-wing and Israeli and some of our cousins on the other side. Half-brothers.
Cousins indeed. You see, you've described individuals who were not afraid to make decisions and to swim against the tide. They were not afraid.
Right.
And when they found someone on the other side of the camp who was also not afraid to make decisions, they could find peace.
And they were very successful in mobilizing a big group of people from their own camp. Because convincing the left-wing parties in Israel, it's not a big challenge. But they were convincing their own people. And why don't we see left-wing parties or peace parties on the other side? Maybe you can assist me looking for them. I'll be very happy to come to the studio again and speak with one of them.
And engage them. Do you see, what in your opinion is a long-lasting solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict? Is a two-state solution feasible?
My gut's feeling, because we are in a guessing period, that this war with the Hamas will strengthen our relation with the Palestinian Authority.
Eventually. Do you
yes.
think a two-state solution is the way to go?
I don't know without terming it one or the other. It's a process, There's no way for revolutions, but evolution. We tried the revolution. Barak tried, Olmert tried, let's give him everything. Barak, Prime Minister Barak, he was in this commando elite unit, Matkal, and they are very straightforward. And I will not forget, before he went to Camp David, he addressed us in the public in Israel and said, I will look into the white in the eye of Arafat, and we will agree. That's a typical naive commando. There's a target, let's charge, and we succeed.
Yeah.
And Arafat was laughing all the way. because that's an easy catch. So I believe that the war against the Hamas and the blow that the Hamas will get, Yom Kippur War started very bad to Israel. It's very bad.
Yes.
And on the second day of the war, the chief of staff said we will break their bones and heads, and everybody was thinking he has his own illusions. And that happened.
Yeah.
4 days later, 10 days later, the war ended with 40 kilometers, us, the Israeli IDF, 40 kilometers from Damascus, 100 kilometers from Cairo, and only sand between us and Cairo. So the Hamas will receive a big blow. I think it will be a lesson to many, including Hezbollah, but also to the Palestinian Authority, so that, on one hand, plus the strengthening of relations with the Gulf states will, and some internal developments in Israel and the Palestinian Authority, all these are my gut feelings, will lead to better reality.
Ambassador.
And usually I'm not an optimist.
Wow. Okay.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Michael Lotem is the ambassador of Israel to the Republic of Kenya. He's been our guest. Keep it here for more conversations.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.